Hello everybody, welcome back to Fanblade. If you're watching this video on the day that it came out, on June the 9th, 2022, then it is 25 years to the day since this concert was recorded. This is, of course, Ben Folds 5's complete sessions at West 54th. This is a fantastic concert. I highly recommend you check it out. I would love to include some footage here, but I obviously can't for copyright reasons. But it is available on YouTube. There is a link in the description. If you've seen any of the other videos on this channel, then you'll know that I play drums, bass and piano. So it's a no-brainer that I would be a Ben Folds 5 fan, but it's actually deeper than that. 25 years ago, I'd only been playing bass for a little over a year. I could hold a beat on the drums, although I was certainly no great virtuoso, and as for piano skills at the time, well, I liked pianos. It was a full 6 months after this was recorded before I ever actually heard of the band. A friend of mine had their song Underground on a cassette tape, and it just instantly sort of clocked that as something that I need to listen to more of that. And it was only a day or two before I found myself in a record shop buying their first album. I loved this instantly. I loved this so much that I went straight back the next day and I bought their second album. And bearing in mind that this was a couple of months before the single from this album, Brick, before that made it really big. So it's the only time in history that I can honestly say, hand on heart, that I was into a band before they were big. Normally it takes about 15 years. Like, I'm really into Outkast at the moment. And the thing that really struck me about these records was just the sheer power of the music. It was everything that I loved about punk combined with, you know, real compositional ambition. There was some real songwriting skill involved in this, and the execution is just flawless. I found so much inspiration in their music and in their approach to it that I just fed off that for years. And I'm not a fan of the band because I play drums, bass and piano. I play drums, bass and piano because of the band. So who were they then? Well, obviously, as the name suggests, Ben Folds, leader, pianist, singer, songwriter. I've been a long-term fan of his solo work ever since the band broke up. For all these years since, he's gone on to do some wonderful things. He is a vocal advocate for funding the creative arts and also an advocate for music education. So he's just out there doing good stuff every day. Darren Jesse was the drummer. He could play everything from metal to jazz and also seamlessly flip between the two, even in the space of one song. Just a very versatile, very solid, very talented drummer. And of course it was Robert Sledge on the bass guitar. I mean, he's my guy. He's my biggest bass hero. He opened my ears to the idea that a bass line could be both melodic and dynamic while still anchoring the band and maintaining the groove. To me, the thing that really stuck out about Robert Sledge's playing is how it wasn't trying to stick out. It's very understated while it's still being a key part of the musical puzzle and holding the whole band together, but they are enjoyable counter-melodies in their own right. It's a difficult balance to achieve. I got this DVD in 1999, and for years it was the only DVD I owned. Or needed, for that matter. I must have watched this hundreds of times. I mean, it's burned into my retinas to the point where I can tell you what most of the audience are wearing. But of course, much more important than that is the music, the people who played it, and the gear that they used. It wasn't hard to work out that Ben Folds was playing a Baldwin piano. It's literally written on the side of his piano. Now, I was lucky enough to get myself a Baldwin piano about 10 years ago, and it is every bit as good as I'd hoped, even if it's not quite in tune. It seemed that Darren Jesse played quite a lot of different types of drum kit over the years, but usually some kind of vintage equipment. In the video he is playing a vintage Slingerland kit. Now, I've never been able to get myself a Slingerland kit, but I did for a long time have a vintage Pearl kit, also in a blue sparkle wrap. Unfortunately that kit suffered the ravages of time, and basically I beat it to death. After one too many things on it had broken, I donated it to a fellow who restores old drum kits to give to students, so that's gone to a good place. As for Robert Sledge's choice of bass guitars, well, A few months after Brick was a huge hit, I was reading my May 1998 edition of Bass Player magazine, and I saw this advert. Robert Sledge of Ben Folds 5 and his Epiphone Les Paul bass. Well, obviously I was pining for one, but unfortunately I had already spent my budget for bass guitars for the year on a bass that I saw in the March 1998 edition of Bass Player magazine. It's an Epiphone EB1, and I'll be dusting this one off to show you plenty more about it next week. I have unfortunately lost my copy of June 1998's Bass Player magazine, which actually featured an interview with Robert Sledge. However, I reached out to the Bass Players United Facebook group, and Mr. Tim Romaine, thank you very much sir, came back with these screenshots. The article talks about Robert Sledge's choice of bass. It reads, "Sledge plays his electric parts on a Gibson Les Paul Deluxe with an Epiphone neck and Thunderbird style pickups. It sounds like I'm playing a few different basses on the album, but it's only one. I just varied my playing to take on different characters." Elsewhere in the article he gives some great clues as to how the band actually played together. "For a long time we had a policy of not paying too close attention to each other. We'd always been in bands where it's make the downbeat really heavy here and follow this double beat there. Now we try to be a bit more melodic and jazzy. It's based more on Darren's hands than his feet. We just play with really big ears." That last line about playing with big ears really hit home for me. If you're playing in a band or an orchestra or any kind of ensemble where there is more than one musician, you have to be listening all the time. If you're making noise and you're not listening to how that noise fits into all the other noises that everyone else is making, then your noise isn't going to fit with their noise. It's as simple as that. You have to listen. And that's one of the biggest lessons that I ever learned from Robert Sledge, was play with really big ears. It's the best advice you can give any musician. However, setting all of that aside, let's talk Les Paul basses. Now, despite all the warnings that I'd heard that they were heavy and they were unbalanced and they sound weird and it's like playing a bookshelf, I still really wanted one. I still had it in the back of my mind that all of this music that I loved so much was all played on Les Paul basses. Turns out it's not true. He used a Hamer Explorer copy on the first album and a jazz bass on the second album. Although I suppose that's a case of the player being more important than the instrument, because compare the sound of him playing those two to the sound of him playing live with a Les Paul. You can't really pick it unless you are really struggling to listen for it, and only if you know there's a difference. And since I've had the opportunity and the space over the last couple of years to expand my collection of basses, of course I went and got one. Earlier this year a package arrived from Japan, and I had a 1997 Epiphone Les Paul Deluxe. So let's take a look. And here it is. It's an elder body, set neck, maple neck, flame maple top with a rosewood fingerboard. The reason I wanted this one in particular was that at some point in 1998 the model designations changed. The Deluxe became the Standard, the Special became the Deluxe, and the Standard was discontinued for nearly a decade. It gets a little bit messy when trying to figure out what they all mean, but I don't think they actually ever sold enough of these to really care too much. So let's address the criticisms head on here. Is it heavy? Well, I wouldn't say it was light exactly, but I've had heavier Fender jazz basses than this. Now, is it unbalanced? Not really. No, that's sort of is the answer to that. What I found more of a problem though is that it's not centered properly. If you have the strap coming down on a Fender jazz bass, the strap comes over your shoulder at the 12th fret, so the whole instrument is hanging on you like that. So it's not unbalanced from a neck dive point of view, but it is unbalanced from a player's point of view. And to combat both of those, I made a neck dive compensator, which just screws onto the body. It's handy to be able to unscrew it so that it'll fit in its case, but what that does is simply screws on there, strap attaches to the end of that. What little neck dive there was is gone entirely, and it's now hanging in the right place so that I'm not reaching for the 5th fret and getting the 7th because the whole bass is over there. So, does it sound weird? Not really. Sounds like a bass guitar to me. If anything, it was sort of lacking a little bit in clarity, but I have solved that problem simply by disconnecting the tone pots. Even if you have both pots on full, the fact that they're still in the circuit, they're going to be leaking a little bit of treble to ground, so just disconnected those, took them out of the circuit, and that's just given the thing a bit of clarity back. And of course I have wired it in stereo with this little mono stereo switch in the back, and that's just done the trick. It sounds great. 3-post bridge, meh. At least the Hipshot replacements for these are much easier to get than Hipshot's Rickenbacker replacements. And in the near future I will be buying one for this bass, and we'll do a comprehensive review and comparison, but for now, this one's doing an okay job. It's only okay. I believe the keyword is meh. And lastly, does it play like a bookshelf? No. Its neck is on the slightly larger side, but it's within P-bass specs, and I've set it up properly. It's a lot of fun to jam on. Robert Sledge also had quite a setup of pedals, most notably a big muff distortion. I don't have one of those. I'm on the lookout for one, but for now we'll have to make do with my trusty Governor 2 pedal. From Marshall. It's got a nice thick bass sound, especially when you're only running the bridge pickup through it and you keep the neck pickup clean. That sounds huge! When I'm making the little demo songs at the end of most of my videos, I'm usually doing my best to sort of show off the instrument in its best light, but this time the entire point of this bass is to pay homage to the band that really fueled my excitement when I was starting out, and has inspired me on more levels than I could even put into words. So it's time to finally head to the studio and unleash myself in full-scale Ben Folds 5 mode. So there it is. It's exactly what I expected, and it just fills me with joy to play that type of music on that bass. Ben Folds 5 sadly broke up after 3 albums, then they reunited for a one-off concert, and then they reunited for another album, and then they did a short tour and put out a live album, and then that was that. They're on hiatus now. I think they're about due to do something else. Please? Ben Folds, of course, continues to tour and be amazing in every way. Darren Jesse has put out several albums with a band called Hotel Lights. They are all on Spotify. He's also put out a couple of solo albums. They are also on Spotify. Link in the description. And as for Robert Sledge, he's returned to his hometown of Chapel Hill, North Carolina. He's set up a recording studio where he teaches and produces. And he plays in a band called Surrender Human. Their album is on Spotify. Link in the description. Go have a listen to that one, because it's really, really good. And that about covers everything that I need to say on the subject, so just would like to say a huge thank you to Robert Sledge for the years of inspiration and enjoyment. A huge thank you to you, the viewer, for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Remember to play with big ears, and I'll see you next week. Cheers.